As you may remember, a few days ago, in one of my recent videos, I described in detail the provocative actions of NATO countries in the Baltic Sea, in order to block Russian ports and ships. Back then, in that video, I made it clear that all the statements of the North Atlantic Alliance that Russia was the main culprit in damaging underwater cables, owned by Western countries, was nothing more than a false flag operation. Their main goal was to accuse Russia of attacking underwater cables, in order to justify to the world community the launch operation to patrol the Baltic Sea, and in fact, a blockade of the Gulf of Finland. The main goal pursued by NATO is to ban the entry of Russian ships into the Baltic Sea. In fact, before our eyes, the North Atlantic Alliance is trying to occupy the entire Baltic Sea, and turn it into an internal sea of the alliance. These NATO actions provoked a harsh reaction from Moscow. The Russian authorities have explicitly stated that the alliance's actions will not remain unanswered. According to Moscow, Russia will give a mirror response to all NATO's provocations. In particular, the Kremlin has officially announced that Russian warships will also begin patrolling the Baltic Sea, and detain ships from NATO countries. Thus, very serious events are rapidly developing before our eyes. And these events may eventually escalate into a global war. Against this backdrop, on February 12, the Danish Defence Intelligence Service also added fuel to the fire. In particular, the Danes have officially stated that Russia is preparing for war with NATO. According to them, Russia will definitely deliver a crushing blow to NATO, as soon as Moscow feels that the alliance is weakened, and divided internally by political differences. At the same time, the Danish Defence Intelligence Service stressed that the Russian army would be ready for a full-scale war with NATO, 5 years after the end of the war in Ukraine. Moreover, the Danish Defence Intelligence Service has admitted that in case of war between Russia and NATO, the alliance has almost no chance of winning, if the United States refuses to intervene in the conflict and help the North Atlantic Alliance. My dear truth seekers, let me remind you that a few weeks ago, Russian Defense Minister Andrei Belousov also stated that a war between NATO and Russia could take place in the next decade, and that Moscow needs to prepare for this war in advance. At the same time, he stressed that it is the North Atlantic Alliance that can attack Russia, and not the other way around. Moreover, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation still claims that it is NATO, led by the Anglo-Saxons, that continues to threaten Russia's national security. The fact that Russia has begun transferring MiG-31K supersonic interceptor fighters, armed with Dagger hypersonic missiles, better known as KINZHAL, to Kaliningrad, indicates that Moscow is indeed preparing for war with the North Atlantic Alliance on the territory of NATO countries. It is reported that starting in 2023, Russia has deployed several dozen MiG-31K supersonic interceptor fighters, and about 1,000 Dagger hypersonic missiles in Kaliningrad. At the same time, the number of these hypersonic missiles in Kaliningrad is growing every month. During the Cold War, one of the central bases for storing and maintaining strategic and tactical nuclear weapons in the USSR was the so-called Object 711, or Ivano-Frankivsk 16, located in the urban-type settlement of Delyatyn, in Ukraine. According to open sources, built in 1955, 150 meters underground, this two-story military warehouse was able to withstand a direct hit by an atomic bomb, and was considered one of the safest places in the world. After the removal of the entire nuclear arsenal from there in the early 90s, the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense considered this empty military warehouse to be an ideal place to store most of the aviation and missile ammunition from Western Ukraine. However, in the course of a special military operation, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation clearly showed that the latest non-nuclear Dagger hypersonic missiles are capable of easily destroying such anti-nuclear fortifications. Let me remind you that on March 18, 2022, the Dagger hypersonic missile completely destroyed the famous Object 711 with a direct hit. This was a real shock for the NATO command. And given that this happened just 80 kilometers from the border with Romania, this was doubly shocking to the NATO command, since in 2016, Romania deployed the Aegis Ashore missile defense system with 3 batteries of American interceptor missiles of IRBM SM-3 system on its territory, at the Deveselu military base. According to the Pentagon, these American missiles are designed to intercept intercontinental ballistic missiles and warheads at atmospheric altitudes and long ranges. However, the strike of the Russian hypersonic missile Dagger clearly demonstrated that the vaunted American missile defense system Aegis Ashore, in case of military necessity, would be wiped off the face of the earth long before it could be put on alert. In my opinion, the recent transfer of Russian MiG-31K with a set of hypersonic missiles Dagger on board to the Kaliningrad region should be considered not only as a message from Moscow to the militant NATO hotheads in Washington, but also as a clear preparation of Russia for a possible direct military clash with NATO. Meanwhile, many international analysts and military experts continue to convince the public that it will never come to a direct clash between NATO and Russia. However, it is worth noting the fact that the same international analysts and military experts convinced the public back in 2021 that Russia would never dare to launch a special military operation in Ukraine. Seeing how the Anglo-Saxons continue to test Russia's patience by supplying a large number of weapons to Ukraine, it becomes clear that the West is probing the so-called red lines in the hope that Moscow will give up. However, unfortunately for the Anglo-Saxons, Russia began to work ahead of the curve. If during the Yeltsin era, Russia was in the role of a slave and reacted situationally to certain events, now everything has changed radically. In a situation where conflict is inevitable, Russia began to strike first. And that is why the transfer of the hypersonic missiles to Kaliningrad indicates that a conflict with NATO may begin very soon and on the territory of the Anglo-Saxons. By the way, the transfer of Russian fighter interceptors with hypersonic missiles to Kaliningrad frightened not only the NATO command in Poland. This event also scared Sweden and Finland. Russia made it clear to the Anglo-Saxons that they should not tempt fate and resolve their issues, hoping that Russia will get bogged down by a special military operation in Ukraine. However, unfortunately in the West, there are still people who don't understand a lot of things and live in their own fictional world. The military activity of NATO and the United States near the Russian Far East and the Arctic indicates that the West is creating its own strike fist, thinking that now is the perfect moment for this, since Russia is busy with Ukraine. Unfortunately, the current political elite of the West has absolutely degenerated in matters of the security of their countries. When you hear the statement of Western leaders, especially from the Baltic states, you understand that all this is bordering on mental illness. If the situation doesn't change soon, and the West continues to step on Russia's corns by refusing to be friends with Moscow, then unfortunately, a big war cannot be avoided, and hypersonic missiles in Kaliningrad will begin the process of NATO demilitarization. Thus, it can be stated that Russian President Vladimir Putin, thanks to MiG-31K supersonic interceptor fighters, armed with the latest hypersonic missiles, grabbed NATO by the throat. Indeed, in the event of a war, Russian hypersonic missiles stationed in Kaliningrad can easily destroy all NATO decision-making centers and command posts in Europe in just a few minutes. Moreover, in January of this year, Russian sources reported that the Russian military and political leadership is seriously considering deploying the world's most powerful ORESHNIK hypersonic ballistic missiles to Kaliningrad. At the same time, many Russian telegram channels expressed confidence that several units of the latest missiles are already in Kaliningrad. If this information is true, then the ORESHNIK hypersonic ballistic missile can reach Berlin in 2 minutes and 30 seconds. The flight to Warsaw will take 1 minute and 20 seconds. The flight to Paris will take 5 minutes and 52 seconds. The flight to London will take 6 minutes and 50 seconds. All this makes a potential future conflict with Russia obviously a losing matter for NATO. And of course, this fact is the real victory for Putin.